Iran has reported an accident at its main nuclear facility at Natanz. Tehran's atomic agency says it's affected the site's electrical distribution grid. Now, power was out across the facility's above-ground workshops as well as the underground enrichment halls. Now, on Saturday, President Hassan Rouhani said Iran had launched new advanced enrichment centrifuges at that site. This was after several centrifuges were damaged in a fire last year, an incident that Tehran called an act of sabotage. Well, Iran is high on the agenda as U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd visits Israel. Now, tensions in that region have been escalating in recent weeks.
The Tehran of today poses a strategic threat to international security, to the entire Middle East, and to the State of Israel. And we will work closely with our American allies to ensure that any new agreement with Iran will secure the vital interest of the world, of the United States, prevent dangerous arms race in our region, and protect the State of Israel.
Well, Harry Fawcett is in West Jerusalem, and we'll have more on Lloyd Austin's visit for us just in a moment. But first, let's speak to Asad Beg. He's in Tehran. Asad, when it comes to this accident, accident at a nuclear plant never sounds like good news. What more do we know about this and how dangerous it could be?
Well, the Iranians haven't given much information. We know that there was an electrical incident. They've said that there are no leaks and no injuries, and they are investigating the matter, and they will release that when the time is right. Natanz is Iran's main nuclear facility, and under the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran is allowed to enrich uranium at this facility. And just days ago, it was announced that advanced centrifuges would start being used at this Natanz facility. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because last summer we were told by the Iranians that there was a fire outside the Natanz facility at an outside shed, it was called at the time. We were shown images on state TV, and Iran was downplaying it. But then foreign media published satellite images that showed that the damage is quite extensive. Then we heard from the Iranians that there was an explosion. Then it was called an act of sabotage, and just yesterday an official from the Natanz plant said that it was an act of terror. So there are suspicions. Currently we have lawmakers saying that there's a possibility that this was sabotage and infiltration, and all this is going on whilst Iran is expected to return to Vienna next week to continue those talks around the nuclear deal, the 2015 nuclear deal, where Iran want all Trump-era sanctions lifted and want the United States to return to the deal, and the United States wants Iran to come back into compliance in terms of that 2015 nuclear deal.
Of course, and I want to ask you a little more about that, especially in terms of the timing of this. Obviously, very critical, delicate moment in those talks. How might this actually affect those discussions?
Well, it's definitely not going to help those discussions. Just on Tuesday, an Iranian ship was targeted by a mine. Now, reports are saying Israel is behind that, and it adds an extra layer of complexity, because the lawmakers here and others in this country believe that there are active attempts to sabotage or derail those negotiations. And in the region, we know that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel are not happy with that 2015 nuclear deal. They've never been happy with that 2015 nuclear deal, and they're not happy with Joe Biden and his administration's policy in terms of engaging with Iran. So if these incidents continue, yet we still don't know who's behind them, it definitely could anger the Iranians and make those negotiations far tougher than they already are.
Asad Beg there for us in Tehran, the Iranian capital. Thank you so much, Asad. Well, let's now cross over to Harry Fawcett in West Jerusalem for us. Harry, no doubt there's already been some discussion about Iran during this visit, but it really has been about reaffirming ties for Mr. Austin to go to Israel.
Well, certainly that's the public-facing impression that both he and his counterpart here, Benny Gantz, the Israeli defense minister, were trying to portray during their news conference after their first meeting here on Sunday. Both of them talked about the long-term nature of the Israeli-US relationship and indeed plans going forward in terms of military acquisitions. Of course, the United States gives nearly $4 billion a year of military assistance to Israel, as well as that, talking about the nature of the relationship going forward and the fact that it is as strong as it ever has been. So you get that pretty typical kind of language. But obviously, we're talking at a time when the Iran issue is the main issue and the issue of divergence between these two administrations. It's very different from the Trump era. The Biden administration wants to try to engineer a return to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. The government of Benjamin Netanyahu is very much opposed unless very serious set of requirements from Israel are met, which are unlikely to be met in any such return. So what was interesting was that Benny Gantz, in the comments that you heard earlier, was talking about working closely with the United States to try to make the best of any deal. That's very different from the language we've been getting from Benjamin Netanyahu in recent days, saying that Israel would not be bound by any deal that would simply pave the way to Iran getting nuclear weapons in the future. As for Lloyd Austin himself, he was also talking about how the alliance remained as strong as ever.
Our commitment to Israel is enduring and it is ironclad. And I pledge to continue close consultations in order to ensure Israel's qualitative military edge and to strengthen Israel's security.
And Harry, this is all also happening as we're seeing this potentially shadowy maritime conflict happening between Israel and Iran. Is that likely to feature in the discussions in the next few days?
Well, I think almost certainly it will. I mean, there are reports that Israel had been in touch with the United States about that incident that Assad was referring to earlier in the Red Sea on Tuesday, with the Iranian ship being struck by or being attacked with a mine. And yes, that is something that is very much playing in the background and is interesting, given what Netanyahu was saying about not being bound by any potential agreement, because there have been reports of this covert Israeli long-term military attempt to stop Iran exporting oil via ships to Syria, that there have been a number of alleged attacks along those fronts. In February and March, there have been two explosions on Israeli-owned shipping in the Arabian Sea, which has been blamed on Iran, and this most recent event now. And of course, we have this electricity failure at Natanz, which is being interpreted in the Israeli media and assessed in the Israeli media, which has close links to the Israeli security establishment, as some kind of a sabotage event. So with Netanyahu talking about essentially freedom of action of Israel out with any return to the JCPOA and this kind of background, at the same time as Austin is here, at the same time as these talks are going on, I think it's pretty clear that they will be on the agenda.
Very interesting indeed. Harry Fawcett there with all the latest for us from West Jerusalem. Thanks so much, Harry. Now, Jordan's King Abdullah and his half-brother have appeared together for the first time since their political rift. Former Crown Prince Hamza joined